of elite hypocrisy and global greed, and a country that offered no way but through blood and business. He didn't invent cocaine, simply supplied addiction. Now, who was Pablo Escobar Gaviria? Pablo Escobar Gaviria was born in 1949 in Rio Negro and grew up in Medellin. He was said to be the most notorious of criminals and the biggest.
I am going to defend my honorable client in this sanctum of justice today, and he is none other than Ernesto Rafael Guevara, popularly known as Che Guevara. According to me, he doesn't even deserve to be here in this discussion today. I don't consider him a devil, and neither should he be. It's an utter disrespect to such a godly figure, and today I'm going to prove it to you all. An Argentinian born in the upper middle class who grew to be a physician, understood the pain of the masses being exploited by the ruling class, the bourgeoisie, and decided to lay his life for his men. He didn't share any mother tongue or blood with them, but something even bigger: the will to fight the exploiters, the capitalists who made them suffer. You know what was his fault? He was a leftist, a liberal, a communist indeed, who followed the ideals of Karl Marx and Lenin. But the right, just like always, cannot tolerate any sort of threat against their regimes. So, just like any other fellow communist or any leftist, he was demonized by the states. To his selfless revolutionary image, the stain of being a cold-hearted executioner was attached. But enough of this false propaganda, and let's get on with the allegations that are proposed against him. First of all, the major allegation, that is of him being an executioner. You know what they called him? The butcher of La Cabana, accused of execution of hundreds of prisoners in La Cabana prison. It was a big conspiracy against Che. I would like to enlighten all of you that there is not a single confirmed case of execution under Che where a fair trial was not given to the prisoner. And majority of them were without his involvement in the tribunal that took place, that foresee the decisions. Respected judges, I would like to tell you that there was just a single record of Che killing a prisoner, and that was transparently mentioned by himself in his diary. That was of Eutemio Guevara, who was a traitor working for the Batista regime under Cuba. Even then, even a traitor who surrendered himself and asked for death, Che gave him a fair trial in the midst of war. And there are clear government documents that prove this. Now tell me, which butcher would show mercy even to the traitors? Now, Orlando Borrego, the president of the tribunal that oversaw these hearings, has officially stated in his government records, which are here available to the judges. It states that our paramount concern was to ensure the revolutionary morality and justice prevailed. Che was very careful, and nobody was shot just on the basis of accusations. There were fair trials, and the whole cases were analyzed, the witnesses were seen. Also, according to John Lee Anderson, who was another investigator and writer in New York Times, in his book on the La Cabana trials, has stated that there were above board if summary affairs with defense lawyers, witnesses, prosecutors, and attending publics. The trials were totally fair. But yeah, I won't deny the fact that in the committee, which also consisted of Raul Castro, Raul's reputation for ruthlessness was confirmed. But I don't think anybody with a functioning nervous system would call Raul Castro as Che Guevara. Both were different people, and I guess that is enough evidence on the account for the basis of this execution. Now, they also accuse him for being an incompetent leader and a failed leader. Respected judges, I would like to present you with the data that showcases Che's extraordinary work for the liberated nation of Cuba. In healthcare, under Che's leadership, within a year, I would repeat that within a year, the life expectancy just bloomed from being 62 years to 65.4 years. The crude mortality from being 9 per thousand to reduced to 7.56 per thousand. The mortality under age 5 years decreased from 90 to 75.9, and this was the data of just 1 year. The literacy rate spiked from 72% to 96% in a year. That was the highest in its time. Also, there was industrial boom under him. They call him a racist, but another allegation that is for him of being a racist. They call him a racist, but there are enough evidence to deny this fact. Che himself gave his opinions in the United States against the apartheid system that took place in South Africa. He wrote letters to revolutionaries like William Morris, entrusting that the revolution.
We probably had a very stable childhood, had access to good quality education while growing up, and had parents that raised us and supported us. Now I want all of you to imagine what would happen if all of that childhood stability was snatched away from you within the blink of an eye. What would you do if you were left out on the streets all alone as a helpless 3-year-old child with no parents, no family, no protection, in the middle of the streets, raised in the middle of murders, cartels and trafficking? Do you think your mental health would have been normal? Do you think you would have been able to make it this far in life? Well, the very idea of such a life for a child sounds horrifying, right? Well, ladies and gentlemen, this horrifying idea of a life was unfortunately the reality that Charles Manson was born into. A very good morning to the honorable jury and to the august gathering. I stand here today to maybe provide a different perspective about a man, Charles Manson, whose name has been highly stigmatized and condemned upon. Because back in 1969, famous Hollywood actress Sharon Tate was brutally murdered inside her own house by 4 people. These 4 murderers were the followers of Charles Manson and a part of his cult. Now, Manson had a very twisted and appalling ideology about life. He felt like there was an upcoming race war that he called Helter-Skelter, and he believed that everybody deserves to be murdered except for him and his followers. So needless to say, there was a lot that was being said about him in the headlines and in the press, but that's not what we are here for today. Let's try to analyze the psyche behind such a twisted and disturbed mind. Like I said in the very beginning, Manson had a deeply traumatic childhood, and many criminologists and psychologists argue that had a very profound impact on his later life. Because first and foremost, there was parental neglect and abuse. As Manson was born to a 16-year-old girl who was a severe alcoholic, and she was also a criminal. So she spent most of her life being locked up in prison. So even as a little child, Manson did not receive any maternal care. He was left all alone in the company of strangers, and he did not even know his biological father. And when you are raised under such conditions, it is very easy for you to get a very early exposure to crime, and that is exactly what happened with Manson. When he was nearly 11 years old, he had already started committing crimes, and as a reason, he was being locked up in juvenile detention centers and reform camps, where he was constantly and brutally abused physically, mentally, and even sexually. Then he spent most of his life being locked up in prisons and in institutions, and because of this long-term captivity, it distorted his ability to function as a normal human being in open and free society. In fact, when he was being released from prison in his 30s, he actually asked the prison guard to not let him go because prison felt like his only home that he's ever had. Manson also used his obscure ideology and his delusion of grandeur, of being a cult leader, as a kind of psychological armor to shield himself from his deep and psychological grief stemming from his childhood. And if I were to speak from a more lawful and a more judicial perspective, during the court trial of Charles Manson, the prosecution itself admitted that Manson did not commit any murders because he was not present physically at the crime scene. There were no weapons that were found under his possession, and there was no forensic evidence linking him to the crime scene. And we talk of convicting a man of murder based on what? His ideology, his thoughts, his influence, that his words were somehow able to compel people to commit gruesome and heinous murders and crimes. That is just speech. Speech that is abstract, that is metaphorical, and probably the result of a disturbed mind, but speech cannot be criminalized. This is not law, this is just conjecture. And I'm speaking on his behalf, so maybe I should be criminalized and locked up in prison too. But the point is that this man never even wielded a single weapon in his whole life, so how can he have his hands painted red with blood? So I leave you with that thought to contemplate on, and with that being said, I rest my case. Thank you.
Criminalized. So we have n number of examples in the history where such leaders have, just on the basis of their very provoking words, influenced the masses to do things that were not supposed to be done. So how can you justify that speech cannot be criminalized?
Ma'am, I fully believe that speech and words are very powerful. So they must be used judicially. They have power to change the minds of people. Hitler was a great orator and he influenced and brainwashed the minds of millions of people just by his words. So it's our responsibility, a moral responsibility to use our words judiciously. But when we talk from a more judicial and from a more lawful perspective, words technically cannot come under a crime. They cannot be judicialized.
So what I feel is, after listening to your argument, that he must have received some sort of psychiatric treatment.
He did not actually, ma'am. That is the reason why he turned out this way. Had he received some love and psychological help, maybe he would have turned out differently.
Do you feel that because he was tortured mentally, physically, whatever, since very early part of his life, so do you feel that he was doing good job by giving lectures and provoking so many young persons?
Absolutely not, sir. I do not condone or support any of his actions. I'm just here to maybe try to humanize and understand why he did the things that he did.
No, you have just said that his speech could not be considered as. How could you say
So
like that?
technically what I'm trying to say is what the court also agreed upon. Technically he did not commit a murder because he was not physically present. He did not stab anyone. He was convicted on the basis of his crime was spreading a harmful rhetoric and hate speech. That was his crime. But convicting him of murder and crime, that is something that is a place where we have to draw a distinction. So that is where my point lies.
Listen, do you feel that if anybody here in Pali give a lecture to a mob and then mob comes and murder another people, don't you feel that that person would be responsible?
Yes, sir. He is responsible for promoting again a harmful rhetoric.
Seen is Sam.
Yes, sir.
Seen is Sam, what he did
Yes, sir.
and what I have quoted.
So that person and his action and his words should definitely not be condoned, and he would be held responsible for instigating the crowd, for provoking the crowd, but direct murder or direct physical harm to any person.
Then who would be responsible in
The
such
people who
case?
actually committed the physical assault.
But he was inspired by that person.
Yes, sir. So he would be criminalized. The charges would be promoting hateful speech, but cannot be criminalized as assault. Speech cannot be criminalized as
Don't you feel that such influential one person who is such influencing should definitely be penalized because
Yes,
he is
100%.
he is creating lot many murderers?
100%.
Right.
These actions should not be condoned, and people like this need to be checked immediately and stopped immediately. Hate speech should not be promoted.
But for that, by that way, he should be convicted for death also directly.
He was convicted for.
If you feel that such persons should not be allowed and such hate speeches or whatever speech
Yes.
by which young people could be influenced should be
Certainly,
stopped.
yes, sir.
Right?
Yes.
So indirectly you are feeling that he should also be
He should be
penalized for
convicted,
that.
yes, sir.